Welcome to another Big Daddy D adventure. Today we're going to be making a cover for my dog kennels. We've had these dog kennels sitting in our living room for a long time, and my wife finally told me, hey, I'd like you to do something, make it pretty. So I looked on the internet, looked all around, saw that you can make an end table out of the kennel, and it kind of dresses it up a little bit. So what I did is I said, well, I like the look of the end table, but let's go ahead and step it up one more notch and go ahead and put a base on it that'll allow us to roll it around, because it actually would get pretty heavy after a while of having everything in it. So, well, here we go. Let's start cutting some wood. So in this project, I went ahead and chose to go with some cedar boards. Went with some 1x6 boards, but the 1x6s were a little large for what I needed to do for the kennel. So what I chose to do is go ahead and rip these boards down. I'll be using some 2-inch wide pieces and some 3-inch wide pieces. So since I had a lot of boards I needed to rip and then boards of different length, I went ahead and got into Excel and kind of took each board and then identified what were the lengths I could get out of those boards that I needed to build it. And then also, what is the width of the board that I needed within those things. So good thing is I was able to lay it all out and get everything within 7 boards, including the top. And again, the top will be a joined top. They'll be flat. It'll have 6 boards across. So now that I have the boards all cut to length, what I'm doing here is I'm going ahead and ripping the edges on those boards. Again, they were standard construction boards, so they had a little rounded edge on them. So what I'm doing here is just shaving off that rounded edge. That way, whenever I go to cut my 2- and 3-inch boards off of these, both edges will be square. So now that I have a square edge on each one of these boards, I went ahead and set my saw up, and here I'm ripping my 3-inch boards off of those other pieces there. I sure am glad I did that cut list. Again, I went board by board, length by length, and identified, what was the length of the board and then what was the width of the board. That list really helped keep me straight, and then I was able to identify and mark the boards as I went. So the only boards that didn't get ripped down to 2 or 3 inches were the tabletop boards. Again, what I'm doing here is ripping off the one edge that's rounded. And then what I did is I put that square edge up against my fence and then trim those boards to length. I went with about a 4 5/8 width board times those 6 boards to get to the total width of the tabletop. So to make the legs, what I chose to do is go ahead and use some pocket hole screws to join the side leg to the front leg. Or front boards to make each corner. So here I am using a little pocket hole jig, a real basic one, and just drilling the pocket hole screws on those side boards. Now that I have the pocket holes drilled, I'm going to go ahead and glue the boards together and then use those pocket holes screws to hold everything together. Went together pretty quick and made a real stiff leg. Again, the larger boards are going to be the front facing and rear facing boards, and then the shorter boards are going to be my side boards. Well, the next part of the frame assembly is to assemble the base. What I did for the base is, again, had the 1x3s all around the perimeter, and then I added a 1x3 across the middle for support. As I'm going to be sliding those kennels into that, I just wanted something to sit supported in the middle. On this joinery, I chose to, again, use glue again, but actually cut some biscuit grooves in there and then use some biscuits to join these things together. And then after I got everything joined together and glued together, I went ahead and threw some straps around it. I didn't have any clamps that I want to use for this base. They were big enough to hold it together, so I went ahead and just threw some straps around it. Worked pretty good. I would say that if I did this again, my biscuit joiner was a little sloppy on the cuts, so the boards kind of peaked up a little bit. So what I'll probably do next time is just stick with the dowels. I end up using dowels for the rest of this project. So the rest of this kennel table frame is all going to be joined together with dowels. In each one of the connections are those cross trim pieces to the corner pieces. I decided to go ahead and put in 2/4 inch dowels. Again, got a real basic dowel drilling fixture here. Doing all of these on the end grain for the cross pieces, and then after I get done with this, then I'll do the side grain pieces into all the legs. So again, just trying to make it pretty easy, but I also wanted to have a real thin profile. That's why I didn't go to any other screws in these joints. All of these joints will be, again, just glued and doweled. Also wanted to highlight a little shop tip here. I don't know if you see, I got a big wooden clamp, and I got that clamp kind of clamped to my big table, but I'm able to use, since it's a double bolt clamp like this, I'm able to use it as a more of a vise for holding all those wood vertical against my tabletop. Worked out real good, made it very handy. So now that I have all the dowels drilled in the frame pieces, I'm going ahead and putting together the front piece and the back piece. You can tell here that one has a corner on it and one is just a flat piece. Again, one end of the kennel will be boxed in, and the other end I'm leaving open so that I can slide the kennel in. So again, using the dowels, pretty straightforward. Just pop in the dowels, throw on some glue, and then tap it together. Work together pretty easy. So while the front and the back panels dry, I'm going ahead and pilot drilling all of the bases for the casters that I'm going to use on it. Of course, my shop dog had to come in and say hello for a while, but he let me get back to work, and I finished drilling all the holes. All right, time to put all the flat pieces together and start making a box out of it. Here again, just putting the cross trim piece on the top and the bottom here. Again, a little bit of glue, a little bit of tap, and then it should be ready for the base. So the base, I'm going to go ahead and just set up here, go ahead and get it aligned pretty well. And then went ahead and pilot drilled all of these corners. So I can sink some 3-inch construction screws here in the corners. So that'll be how I attach the base to the verticals. So I think it's pretty stiff. Well, we made it to the end of the base assembly. Here I'm going ahead and screwing the casters on in all those pre-drilled pilot holes that I had. So the base is now done. Now it's time to work on the top. Well, to make this flat panel top, what I decided to do is go ahead and break it up into 2 sets of 3 board panels. Here I'm just gluing it all together. What I'll do is I'll join squeeze them together with clamps, and then I'll go ahead and put a couple of cawls on them, boards on top and bottom. The boards that squeeze from top to bottom are mainly trying to get it as flat as I can while I'm squeezing those boards together. These boards, again, I don't have a joiner or a planer or anything like that. So the boards had a little bit of camber on those edges, just a little bit, but enough to where whenever you were squeezing them together, they start to twist a little bit. So that's why I went back and added these kind of clamps across them so that they would stay as flat as possible. It's not flat. But I have to deal with that in a little bit after I join these 2 sets of 3 board panels together. All right, now that the boards were dried, came back the next day and went ahead and again rinse and repeat. At least now I just have one joint to glue together in the middle, and then again rinse and repeat on the cawls to kind of squeeze the two boards together from top to bottom, and then clamps to squeeze that joint together. And actually went together pretty easy, but one thing about using these thin 1-inch boards is they have quite a bit of cusp to them. So they kind of look like a little U. And without having a planer to thin those down and kind of start with a square board to start with, that causes me to have to make my next side project, which will be a router sled. So the router sled that I'm making is essentially 3 pieces of plywood. I end up using a 1/2-inch piece of plywood on the base of the U shape there, and then 2 3/4-inch pieces for the uprights. Probably could have gone with 3/4 for the base too. It's just I didn't have a piece that was long enough. But after screwing all these things together, it was stiff enough, so it met my needs. Again, what a router sled is, it's essentially a cradle that will hold your router. And then what you do is use a flattening bit on your router, or a square end bit. And you use the router sled to just hold the router square to, or I guess right above the surface that you're going to be milling off. And you just take multiple passes, a little bit on each pass, and then you get a flattened top, assuming that your rails that you are sliding this thing back and forth across are flat. Well, before I turned my router loose on this board, I was kind of worried. It had quite a bit of curvature to it, or each board was curved. So what I decided to do is go ahead and run over with my hand plane. First, what I'm doing here is running across the back of it and trying to take out the high spots where I can. It actually did a pretty good job. Took off quite a bit of shavings off of this and made it flat enough that when I flipped it over and then started working on the top side, that I wouldn't create any additional stresses. So I think it's flat enough to flip it over and start working the top side. So when I flipped it over, I noticed that on the top side, the centers were high, and on the back side, the edges of the boards were high. So here I'm just working off the top of those boards to try to get it a little flatter before I start working it over with the router. Didn't want to run over the route with the router and have to take too many heavy bites. I was worried about it ripping this cedar. Yeah, I have to admit, using my hand plane was kind of therapeutic. Again, using a hammer to make adjustments, just kind of tapping on either the back of the frame or the front of the frame to help it either take a heavy bite or a light bite. Here I just switched the plane to take some heavier bites because I'm trying to get those center of those boards to go down. Then I just tap on the front and kind of retract back that blade, and then I'll able to take a little lighter cut around that knot area. Now that I got some of the high spots off of the front, off the top and off the bottom, went ahead and made a little stiffener frame here to the bottom that I'm screwing here to the bottom of the tabletop. Now that I got that stiffener frame mounted to the bottom, went ahead and set up my rails and just started using the router sled. Here what I'm doing is I'm taking off about I guess it was about 1/16 of an inch in each pass, maybe a little less, and then just inching it across the top of that board. Again, just hitting those high spots. And then eventually I'll get down to where it's taking a full cut all the way across the board. And then at that point, that's when I call this thing flat. So we ended up taking about 3 passes to get all the way to a flat surface. And on that last pass, well, I did just a real light, maybe a 30-second or less pass. And then now that it's flat, I'll get out the sander and we'll start sanding it. So when you got done with the router sled, it's going to leave some really light tool marks, assuming that you took a light pass on that last turn. If you took a heavy pass, you might get some bigger tool marks. But all I'm doing here is just sanding out those tool marks left by the router bit. And then after that, I'll get the router out with a 1/4 inch roundover bit. And I'll go ahead and just round the edges on this top. Well, some projects you never feel like you end up finishing sanding, but hopefully this will be the last sanding that I'll do. I'll just touching up the edges that weren't hit by the router, and then also a little bit on the bottom before I start trying to apply some stain. So the finish I selected for this is a golden oak, and then after I get done staining all of the base and the top. Of course, I am staining the top and the bottom of everything. But when I get done with it, then I'll go ahead and run over the top and then the legs, or the outsides of the legs, with some Minwax. What I'm trying to do is match another entertainment center that we have in our house, and it happens to be oak. And after doing a couple of test stains, this cedar took this golden oak to be close enough to where make my wife happy that it matches the rest of the furniture in the house. So after brushing on the stain, what I did is I waited for a while, let it dry, try to get it to soak in a little bit, then went over it with a rag and wiped off any excess. So again, did that on the top and then also doing it on the base here. So worked out pretty good, gave me a pretty even coat. Well, I love it when a plan comes together. Last thing that's left here is to use those pocket hole screws that I left in those top trim boards to screw the tabletop to the base. And get a few more of these screws in, and I am done. Now that everything was together and done, only thing left was to go ahead and give it a light coat of that Minwax. Went over the whole tabletop and all of the legs, and turned out pretty good. Well, I really like the way this project turned out. Kennel fit in the crate, or the crate fit on inside this frame really nicely. Doors were able to open and close with those little 2-inch trim boards. So I really liked it, and best of all, my wife really liked it. Well, hopefully you liked it too. And again, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to go on more workshop project adventures with me, hit the subscribe button. Till next time, take care. Bye-bye.